Hello, and welcome to the Mathematicians Podcast, the podcast where we look at the fascinating stories behind the figures that count in the history of maths. I'm your host, Benjamin Cornish, and today we are simultaneously exploring the life and legacy of Thymaridas, a mathematician who is barely known at large, and yet who was a pivotal figure in the lineage of linear algebra. Now, I used to have a friend who was a pirate. Every day he would work his 3 remaining fingers to the knuckle. He would swab the decks, he hoisted the mainsail, he heaved and he hoed, and possibly a 4th pirate-themed action. Over the years, he earned promotions, from lowly deckhand to sailor to boatswain to quartermaster to first mate, and after 16 years below the mast, he finally thrust his cutlass through the back of his former employer to earn his final promotion of captain. The trouble is, in these sorts of institutions, people are always promoted to one position higher than their ability. He was an excellent first mate, certainly the first I ever had, but a terrible captain. A big part of captaining, which they don't tell you at Deckhand College, is the HR burden. For him, the challenge was performance management and annual reviews. Yes, as a whole, his operation was highly successful. There was nary a Navy ship in the Gulf that didn't need to change their breeches when his bow breached the horizon. But there was this one sailor that he was convinced was letting the team down. The trouble with the pirate union is that no man may be given a task to complete on their own. Everything's a team effort. This was due to the difficulties with singing a shanty as a round with a single voice. But the consequence of this decree is that it's very hard to know when a team member is lacking. My friend noticed, however, that whichever work team included this one particular sailor worked slower, sloppier, or had less blood-soaked laundry. The problem looked a little like this. Bruiser, Bender, Basher and Barney can swab the deck in 3 minutes. But when Bruiser and Barney do it, it takes 6 minutes 20. Bender and Barney take 7 minutes 30, and Basher and Barney take 8 minutes 40. So can you work out how much slower Barney is than the others? One more clue. Barney only saves the crew 15 seconds when he helps. Naturally, my friend sent me a pigeon with all the details of the problem and asked me to help him. Fortunately, I have heard of today's mathematician. Thymaridas hailed from Paros, an island in the Aegean Sea, known for its marble and its beauty. Living in such a place, one can only imagine the inspiration he drew from the harmony of nature and the rhythm of the sea. This connection to nature often influenced ancient Greek mathematicians, and Thymaridas was no exception. His love for symmetry and logical structure is evident in his most famous work, the so-called Flower of Thymaridas. But more on that in a moment. Thymaridas is best known for his work on linear equations. If you're a student or educator, you've likely encountered systems of equations before. What Thymaridas contributed was a systematic method for solving certain types of these equations. His method was so elegant that it earned the nickname Flower of Thymaridas, a testament to its beauty and simplicity. In essence, the method deals with systems of equations where the sum of all unknowns is equal to a known constant. For example, if we denote the unknowns as x1, x2, x3 and up to xn, and their sum as s, Thymaridas' rule states that if the sum of n quantities be given, and also the sum of every pair containing a particular quantity, then this particular quantity is equal to 1 over n take away 2 of the difference between the sums of these pairs and the first given sum. So, for example, if we have 5 unknowns, a, b, c, d, e, with their sum 39, and each pair containing a taking the values 8, 10, 14 and 16, can you calculate a and by extension all of the other values? Well, we take the sum of 8, 10, 14, 16 to get 48. The difference between 48 and 39 is 9, and then 9 divided by 3 is 3. You will then see that the original 5 values are the first 5 prime numbers, after 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Now this was a novel concept at the time, because it provided a straightforward way to isolate and solve for variables in a system of equations. While it might seem basic to us now, remember that Thymaridas was working without the algebraic notation we take for granted. His brilliance lay in seeing patterns and devising rules in an era where mathematics was largely verbal or pictorial. Modern mathematicians have drawn parallels between Thymaridas' work and matrix theory, particularly in solving linear systems. It's fascinating to think about how his ideas unlocked key principles that would later be expanded upon by giants like Gauss or Kramer. So, while Thymaridas' flower may be ancient, its seeds continue to bloom in contemporary mathematics. We learn about this method primarily from Iamblichus, 500 years later. Two problems are proposed by Iamblichus that are approached using the Thymaridian bloom, or Thymaridian flower. Specifically, one is stated as follows. Find four integers such that 1. The sum of the first two is twice the sum of the third and the fourth. 2. The sum of the first and the third is thrice the sum of the second and the fourth. 3. The sum of the first and the fourth is 4 times the sum of the second and the third. And 4. The sum of all 4 is 5 times the sum of the second and the third. I'm going to leave this one as a puzzle for you to do in your own time. No mention will be made on real-life problems to which the Thymaridian bloom was applied by Thymaridas' contemporaries. Nor can I find any reliable source to explain why it is known as a bloom or as a flower, so in true podcast tradition I shall make up a reason and sell it with just as much confidence as anything else. The bloom or flower metaphor in ancient Greek culture often symbolised intellectual beauty, symmetry and harmony. Just as a flower has a natural order and structure, Thymaridas' method displayed an elegant way of handling numbers. Mathematicians of that era often sought aesthetic appeal in their formulas, viewing mathematical relationships as reflections of nature's inherent harmony. Yeah, that sounded convincing enough. Another intriguing aspect of Thymaridas' work is his study of prime numbers. In ancient Greece, prime numbers were viewed as the fundamental building blocks of mathematics, and Thymaridas contributed to their understanding. He referred to prime numbers as rectilinear, in that they could only be described using a line. Similarly, he defined the number 1 as the limiting quantity, for it is the lower limit of what can constitute something with quantity, neatly sidestepping fractions less than 1 as these are merely multiples of quantities of whatever divisor is at play. He explored the relationship between prime numbers and their properties in number theory, particularly in how they could be used in equations and ratios. One of the key ideas he worked with was how prime numbers fit into his broader system of solving equations. His mathematical investigations hinted at the unique role prime numbers play in forming more complex numerical relationships. While we lack direct records of detailed theorems from Thymaridas, later Greek mathematicians, such as Euclid, expanded on these foundational ideas, demonstrating that the study of primes was of significant interest in the early mathematical world. In particular, we should get used to the idea of representing numbers with lines, as we gear up for the final few episodes before Euclid. Thymaridas does not offer too much interesting content on his own, but allows us to take a gentle look at what number theory meant at this time. In particular, the ascription of names to number groups. Beyond prime numbers, Greek mathematicians, particularly those in the Pythagorean tradition, studied numbers with special properties. Some of these include planar numbers. These are numbers that can be arranged into geometric shapes like triangles or squares. For example, triangular numbers like 1, 3, 6, 10 and 15 arise from arranging objects in a triangular pattern. Square numbers like 1, 4, 9 and 16 form perfect squares, and so on. Rectangular numbers. Those that are composed of two primes, and thus can be demonstrated by the area of a rectangle. Solid numbers, also known as figurate numbers. These extend the idea of planar numbers into 3 dimensions, forming pyramids and cubes. Cuboid numbers, those that are composed of 3 primes, so can be drawn as a cube. Perfect numbers. These numbers, like 6 and 28, are equal to the sum of their proper divisors. Thymaridas, like other Greek mathematicians, may have been intrigued by the harmony and symmetry of perfect numbers. Amicable numbers. Pythagoreans also explored pairs of numbers, where each number is the sum of the divisors of the other, like the famous pair 220 and 284. So a quick explanation here. The factors of 220 are 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, 11, 20, 22, 44, 55 and 110, which sum to make 284. And similarly, 284 has 1, 2, 4, 71 and 142, which sum to make 220. Further, this might lead you into thinking about groups of numbers larger than 2 that are so-called co-amicable. The term here is social numbers, and this was presented in 1913 by Leonard Eugene Dixon. 5 such numbers might be 12,496, 14,288, 15,472, 14,536, and 14,264. Thymaridas, though primarily focused on equations, operated in a mathematical world where numbers were not abstract symbols, but representations of real-world harmony and order. The Greeks saw numbers as having mystical and cosmic significance, and Thymaridas' work on primes likely fit into this larger tradition. Today, these ancient classifications still find relevance. Planar numbers have applications in discrete geometry, solid numbers in computational mathematics, and perfect numbers in the number theory and cryptography. Even the study of friendly numbers has inspired modern research in number patterns and algorithms. The work of Thymaridas serves as a reminder that our understanding of numbers has a deep historical roots, and even ancient mathematicians recognise their importance in constructing numerical systems. The brilliance of Thymaridas lies in the fact that his work represents one of the earliest algorithmic approaches to solving an algebraic problem, or at least one that can be attributed to a single mathematician whose name has survived through history. This is remarkable considering that it predates the formal emergence of algebra as a structured symbolic discipline by several centuries. What we see in Thymaridas' method is a shift towards abstraction, where numbers and unknowns are manipulated through set rules rather than purely rhetorical or geometric means. His work hints at developing algebraic mindset, one that sees equations as static entities to be solved systematically, rather than through ad hoc reasoning. In many ways, this places him on a path that leads directly to the more fully realised algebra of later mathematicians like Danse and Al-Khwarizmi. To understand why this is so important, we should take a brief journey through the history of algebra itself. Early mathematical problem solving, as found in Egyptian and Babylonian texts, relied on what is now called rhetorical algebra, where problems are stated and solved entirely in words, often describing unknowns in terms of practical quantities like heaps of grain or vessels of oil. The Greeks, particularly under the influence of Pythagoras and Euclid, framed algebraic relationships in geometric terms, referring to lengths, areas, and volumes, rather than abstract numbers, hence the term geometric algebra. Thymaridas marks a transition into what we might call syncopated algebra, a middle stage where equations are structured but not yet written symbolically. This evolution continues with Al-Khwarizmi in the 8th century CE, where systematic methods for solving quadratic equations emerge. But it isn't until the 13th century that we see the full emergence of symbolic algebra. The idea of functions, an essential pillar of modern algebra, takes even longer to develop, appearing in a recognisably modern form with Leibniz in the 17th century, or arguably with Al-Tusi in the 12th century, depending on how we define function-based algebra. Each step along this journey, from Thymaridas to the present, reveals the gradual shift towards the abstraction and symbolic reasoning that define algebra today. Now, let's pivot slightly. It's easy to focus solely on Thymaridas' mathematics, but like all great thinkers, he was more than his work. So what else do we know about him? Thymaridas' life is shrouded in mystery, as is the case with many ancient mathematicians. However, historians agree on a few key details. He lived during a period when Greece was experiencing both intellectual flourishing and political turbulence. This duality often shaped the lives of philosophers and mathematicians who were caught between seeking universal truths and navigating the complexities of their society. Thymaridas, for instance, is believed to have suffered financial hardship later in life. There's an anecdote that he fell into poverty and had to rely on the charity of his community. While this paints a sombre picture, it also highlights the reverence ancient Greeks had for scholars. Despite his financial woes, Thymaridas' intellectual contributions were valued, and his peers ensured that he could continue to work. Thymaridas was not purely a mathematician. Like many thinkers of his time, he dabbled in philosophy, exploring questions about the nature of existence and the role of numbers in understanding the universe. In fact, numbers were more than just mere tools for calculations. They were seen as the fabric of reality itself. This philosophical approach influenced his mathematical work, imbuing it with a sense of purpose beyond practicality. One of the most exciting aspects of studying historical mathematicians is seeing how their ideas resonate in modern contexts. In Thymaridas' case, his work on linear equations has found applications in fields as diverse as economics, engineering, and computer science. Linear systems are at the heart of optimization problems, network analysis, and even artificial intelligence. In particular, with situations where we like to represent something large and complex as a sum of smaller discrete operations. But beyond the technical, there's a philosophical lesson to be learned from Thymaridas. His method reminds us of the beauty and simplicity. In a world increasingly driven by complexity, there's something deeply reassuring about returning to the basics and finding elegance in fundamental principles. This is a lesson I often share with my students. Sometimes the most profound insights come from looking at the problem in its simplest form. As we wrap up today's episode, I'd like to leave you with a thought experiment inspired by Thymaridas. Imagine you're sitting in ancient Paros, tasked with solving a problem using nothing but your intuition and logical reasoning. No calculators, no modern notation, just your mind and the patterns you observe. What strategies would you employ? How would you communicate your findings to others? I set this as a problem to my students. I put up a picture on my board that is fundamentally algebraic, perhaps even attempting to solve for x, and then tell my student to complete the problem without using algebra. What does this even mean? Well, that's somewhat the point. It encourages my students to think about what the tools they are using are. Perhaps when I finally quit my day job and become a motivational speaker at business conferences, I will ask my future students to create a sales pitch for this new hover car, but without using any jargon or business buzzwords. Reflecting on these questions can give us a greater appreciation for the ingenuity of ancient mathematicians like Thymaridas. It's easy to take for granted the tools and frameworks we have today, but they're built on the shoulders of thinkers who saw the world in ways that were both innovative and profoundly human. Well, thank you for joining me on this journey into the life and work of Thymaridas. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your fellow maths enthusiasts. You can also follow the pod on Blue Sky at mathematicians-pod. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or even your own aha moment related to ancient mathematics. Next week, we will be stomping through the life and work of a mathematician who was intent on becoming an apex figure, tackling one of the greatest challenges of the day, Dinostratus. Oh, goodness, I've got to do the ending pun. Let's see. You'd have to be Jurassically misguided to miss our show next week. Don't let this opportunity go extinct. Tune in next week. I'm dino sure you will enjoy next week. You would be dino sorely disappointed to miss next week on the Mathematicians podcast. Oh, these are getting worse and worse each week. No. Okay, I've got a good one. I'll use this next one. So, note to self in the edit, please cut out all of the previous jokes. Until then, goodbye. The music today is Danse, Macabre, Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.